you've ever attempted to eat Dr. Gregor's Daily Dozen but you've struggled to get the portions and the variety in, then today's food prep video is for you. In today's video I'm going to show you how some simple planning and prepping ahead can make all the difference when it comes to eating intentionally. And the good thing is that we're not going to have to suffer through the same meals again and again and again, because today's prep is actually a little bit different. We're not going to be meal prepping, we're going to be ingredient prepping, and that means that you're going to have all the ingredients that you need to hand for the next few days, so you're going to be able to grab and put together some really easy, quick and simple meals that are going to get you a little bit closer to that daily dozen goal. For me, intentional eating, whether that be following a low FODMAP diet or attempting the daily dozen, all begins in the planning. Before I ever set foot in a supermarket, I take a look at my goals and I attempt to break them down into easy, manageable steps. So for example, when it comes to the daily dozen, we know that we're going to need several portions of beans, grains and vegetables throughout the day. So knowing this, as I write my shopping list, I'm going to make a list of which grains and quantities I still have on hand and which I'm going to need to buy. And that then applies to everything from vegetables to fruits to cruciferous to beans to all of the different categories in the daily dozen. So the easiest way I've found to do this, rather than rely on my perimenopausal brain to remember, is to actually have them in front of me. You can either write these down on the bottom of your shopping list, you can download one of the free PDF daily dozen checklists, or the easiest way that I've found is to download the free Daily Dozen app. And right there on your phone, you've got the categories and the quantities that you need as you're writing out your shopping list or as you're going around the supermarket, so you know when you're putting those items in your basket that you've actually fulfilled all of the requirements that you're going to need for the next week. And if you've never used any of these free resources, I will leave links to them in the description box below. So in front of me here, I've got the variety of foods that I expect to be able to eat over the next 3 days. Quantity wise, some of these items are going to feed both myself and my hubby, so we're not looking necessarily at quantity, but we are looking at the variety. So to show you what we're working with over the next 3 days, my bean intake is going to consist of green lentils, cannellini beans and firm tofu. My daily grain intake is going to be made up of a mixture of whole millet, porridge oats, and I'll alternate between this dark rye sourdough loaf and these wholemeal tortilla wraps. In terms of nuts, I've got some peanut butter, some walnuts, some pecans and flaxseed, which actually is in a single category all of its own. So in terms of fruit and vegetables, you can see that I do have a really nice selection here. And for me, there are days that I'm probably going to be eating more than the recommended minimum amounts. That's just how I naturally eat. If you are somebody that is going to struggle to get in the minimum quantities, then this is something that you can work up towards. So for the fruit, I've got fresh pineapple, I've got banana, and I've also got avocado and tomatoes, which I am going to be including as part of my fruit portions. And I've got some frozen berries, got frozen raspberries and frozen blueberries. For the vegetable selection, I can choose from sweet potato, spring onions, peppers, I've got some carrots, some cucumber, some leek greens, courgettes, lettuce, and I've got some fresh herbs on hand as well. When it comes to the cruciferous veg, I can select from radish, broccoli, I've got some kale here, and I've also got some rocket. So one thing that is really important for me to point out when it comes to the Daily Dozen Challenge is that I will be making use of some convenience. So things such as the canned beans, which are also low FODMAP compliant. I've got a couple of varieties of frozen fruit here, which I often find to be cheaper and just as good quality as fresh, particularly if you're buying things out of season. I've got the pre-made sourdough loaf. I do enjoy making my own bread, but it isn't something that I'm going to do day after day. So just to keep things real, I think it's really important to know that you can make use of convenience when it comes to planning and especially budgeting for the Daily Dozen. Something else that I always try to do is to shop my pantry before I shop the supermarket, and that involves going through and seeing exactly what I've got to hand. Things such as nuts and like kernels and grains often last me several weeks. So rather than going out and buying everything fresh Every time I attempt this challenge, I always check what I have in hand and what can be used. Now, sometimes that might be that I'm having the same things week in, week out, but I do try to keep a variety. So as we've seen, I will be having 3 to 4 different grains over the next 3 days. So I am also trying to get that variety rotation in, as well as kind of keeping my food waste to a minimum by going through the pantry and recycling and bringing to the front the things that I've had in there for a little while, and making sure that eventually everything will get used up. So now comes the fun bit where we're going to get our hands dirty and we're going to get on with the food prepping. But what we're doing differently today is that we're actually ingredient prepping rather than meal prepping. And what that means is we're going to take a lot of these base ingredients that I've already shown you, and we're going to get them to the stage where they're ready to pull into making mix and match meals throughout the week, rather than making them into a full-blown recipe and having to eat that same meal day after day after day. That's not something that particularly offends me. I'm quite happy to make a big batch of oats and eat them for the rest of the week. But I do know that a lot of you out there do like a little bit more freedom and a bit more flexibility. So for me, one of the main benefits of ingredient prepping over meal prepping is that you can really take this as far as you want to. Rather than meal prepping, where you're going to have to work through a recipe from start to finish pretty much until it's done, with ingredient prepping you can dig in and out, you can pick and choose exactly how much or how little you get prepared in advance, and if something comes up or if you just run out of motivation halfway through, then you're probably okay to stop. Whereas if you're working through a recipe, you've got ingredients part cooked, then you do need to pretty much continue until the recipe is done. That isn't the case with ingredient prepping. If you've only got an hour to spare, then I would suggest that you do try and concentrate on the things that are going to make the biggest difference to you when it comes to pulling your meals together. Then if you do have some extra time, you can start getting really down into the nitty-gritty of washing vegetables, chopping nuts, things that are not going to take a great deal of time when it comes to putting the meal together, but it would still be nice to have done in advance. If you do have hours and hours to sit and do this on a Sunday, then by all means prep as much as you possibly can, so you're literally just pulling ingredients together and you've got everything ready and laid out for you in your pantry, in your cupboards and in your fridge, all ready to go. So for me, the first thing I like to start on is the things that's going to take the longest to cook. So today that's going to be the millet that we're going to cook in the Instant Pot, and the sweet potato and the tofu that we're going to cook in the air fryer. And because both of these are set on a timer, once these are actually on and cooking, you've then got a set amount of time that you can dedicate to things such as the fruit and veg prep and anything else that you might typically get carried away with. Using tools such as an Instant Pot or the air fryer, if you have them available, are a really good time-saving way to then be able to get on with prepping other ingredients. So for the millet, I did actually go ahead and soak a cup of this overnight. Now for things such as millet, quinoa, barley, I do like to soak them overnight before I go ahead and cook them. So this needs to be rinsed and drained, and then we're going to get it into the Instant Pot. For the sweet potatoes, I'm going to give these a really good scrub, but I am going to leave the skin on. Some of them I'm going to dice up into cubes, and some of them I'm going to actually leave whole, because I will just be peeling them and using and mashing the flesh inside. If you have issues digesting excess fibre, then you'll probably want to peel your potatoes and root veg first. For my FODMAP friends, remember that when you're weighing out a low FODMAP portion, only weigh the part you'll be eating without any peel, skin, seeds or stalks. So in this example, if you're not eating the potato peel, don't include it when you weigh out your serving. This gives you a more accurate serving and makes the most of your low FODMAP portion. So for the sweet potatoes, I'm actually going to keep the 2 roundest ones and I'm going to cook them whole. Just going to put some fork marks into them. Let that heat penetrate a little bit. And these are going to be scooped out of the skin. And the others, I'm just going to top and tail them. Get rid of any nasty bits. And I'm going to chop these into chunks. So I'm just going to coat these sweet potato now in a little bit of oil. Just enough to coat them and stop them from drying out in the air fryer. I'll take those out of there and I'm going to use this same bowl to coat and marinate the tofu. Then for the firm tofu, this needs to be really well pressed and drained. Then I'm going to get some coating on there and get that into the air fryer to crispen up. Thoroughly pressing and draining your firm tofu not only helps to reduce those water-soluble, fat-inducing FODMAPs, but it also allows you to create a crisper end result when baking the tofu. So there we've got all the tofu into nice, even, bite-sized pieces. Add a splash of oil. And I am going to hit this with a little bit of flavour. Some smoked paprika, some salt, black pepper, nutritional yeast, and a touch of corn flour or cornstarch from my American friends, so that we get a nice crispy coating on the outside. And that's ready to go. So I'm going to get the millet going in the Instant Pot. I'm going to put the sweet potatoes into the air fryer. And we're going to let them both do their thing. So another little time-saving hack that I've got for you, which isn't going to save you hours in the kitchen, but it is really quick and easy to implement, is to make sure that you chop your dry ingredients first. And this way you're not having to keep changing your chopping board, you're not having to constantly wash your chopping board in between each thing. So for example, for these, I'm just going to chop these nuts up nice and small. And this is one of those things that you would really only do if you really had plenty of time on your hands for prepping. This literally will just take a minute to do on the day, but it is something that I do like to try and get ahead with doing, and especially if you're measuring your portions out for low FODMAP portion size, so you can get your scale out and just measure everything all at once. Batching tasks like that is also a really good idea, so make sure you get everything weighed at the same time, you do all of your wet prep at the same time, such as rinsing and washing all your ingredients. And like I say, this way you can get all your nuts chopped together all in one quick batch, and then you can move on to things such as grating, chopping, peeling, spiralising your vegetables, which is going to get your board a little bit wetter and a little bit messier. Then you can move on to something such as chopping, coring and peeling the pineapple, which is going to get your board really, really wet and jammy. And then after that, that's probably when you're going to want to wash your board, and hopefully by then you will have finished the majority of your prep. So for something like this, then I'm just going to pop that portion into a little container, and that's going to sit in the fridge until we're ready to use it. And then as long as there's no allergies, you can get on with prepping and chopping the rest of your nuts and seeds straight onto the same board. Just a simple, quick hack like this can make a couple of minutes difference. And sometimes when you're prepping, a couple of minutes can be the difference between getting a task done or putting it off. And so you can see now that this board is still clean enough for me to start topping these beans without having to go to the effort of cleaning it down or dirtying up another board. And a job such as this is also one that you can quite easily sit and do. It doesn't even have to be incorporated into your dedicated meal or ingredient prep time. It's something that you can do while you're sat watching TV, while you're listening to a podcast. You could probably even do it while you're reading a book if you can prop the book on something. It doesn't have to be part of a dedicated, I've got an hour to do this kind of meal prep, so let's get going. And again, it's not something that's going to save you masses and masses of time, but if you take all these little time-saving hacks and put them all together, then that's when you're really going to see the benefit of them. And something as simple as doing this, it's just tedious. It's not something that you always feel like doing. And just silly little things like this can sometimes be make or break in deciding what ingredients you're going to use that day. So if you can get little tedious jobs like this done as and when you can get round to them, then it's just another thing you can tick off your list, and it just gets you that little bit further ahead. Again, we can go on to prepping another item without having to clean or replace the board. And for me, I'm really fussy with my kale. I don't like these really chewy core bits, so I like to make sure that I go through and pick all of those out. If you're not that fussy, then obviously this is something that you don't even need to add into your prep routine. But for me, this does make a difference, because if I get one of those in my mouth, the chances are I'm really not going to enjoy the rest of the meal, and I'm going to be ending up picking through and looking for them and trying to pick them out. So if I can go ahead and get those done beforehand, it's just another little win for me. And again, this is something that you can do quite easily sat watching TV of an evening. Just have a little bag of kale and a little dish or a bin beside you to throw the nubbins in, as I like to call them. Nubbins, technical term. And probably what I do with this is, once I've got a decent handful, I'll start popping the actual kale greens into a colander, and we'll wash those when we move on to the wet portion of the ingredient prep. And that's things such as washing and scrubbing fruits and vegetables, draining and soaking and rinsing grains and beans and legumes, all the type of stuff that we typically do over the sink. So there we've got our green beans prepped, we've got our kale prepped, probably in less time than it takes you to watch the adverts of your favourite TV programme. And all we need to do with those then is give them a quick wash. We can either do that when we're ready to do the wet prep, or we can do that right before we're going to get ready to actually use them. We can then move on to some of the slightly dirtier prep, such as cutting out the florets on this broccoli. And just be mindful of the difference in FODMAPs between the stalk and the heads if FODMAPs are an issue. And again, that can either be bagged up or it can go straight into a colander ready for tackling that with the rest of our wet prep. Again, we've still not cleaned or changed this board, and we can now get on to peeling and grating our carrots. These speed peelers are absolutely fantastic for quick meal prep. And you can see that our board is getting progressively wetter as we move through this prep. So we've gone from the dry prep towards the wet prep. Still no need to clean or change the board if it's not necessary for you. Of course, for something like this, if you do have a food processor to hand, you can speed things up even more by getting everything grated or shredded in there. And I love these cheap and nasty plastic tubs for food prep. You can see by the colour discoloration in them that I reuse them again and again. These are the bane of my husband's life. Every time he opens the cupboard, half a dozen of these fall out on top of his head, but I think they're absolutely invaluable, especially for ingredient prepping. You could even, if you wanted, actually share them out into portions, so it really would make this grab and go then. And especially if you had items that were you needed to weigh the portions in order to make sure that they were low FODMAP, this would be a great way of making that completely grab and go, by storing them portioned out for each individual day, meal or recipe. The smaller courgette I'm going to actually spiral into noodles, The larger courgette I'm going to grate up into 2 or 3 portions of grated courgette, and again this is just my preference, but I do find often that if I want meals to cook really quickly and evenly, that actually grating things like carrots, sweet potato, courgette really does help them to cook much faster. And because my taste buds and my IBS are a total wimp when it comes to spicy food, I like to remove the seeds. So de-seeding a chilli would typically be the last job that I do on a board before washing it up, but I still do have one really dirty job to go, and that's the leeks. It really is a lottery as to how dirty, sandy and gritty your leeks are going to be. I always assume they're going to be really dirty and make it the last job that I do, and I just assume that I'm going to have to wash the board afterwards. So we can see as we get into these whether they're going to be the really dirty, gritty, sandy type. If you're low FODMAP, then you are going to be looking at sticking to the dark green tops. And again, when you buy leeks like this from the supermarket, these trimmed varieties, it is very hit and miss as to exactly how much of the dark green leek you do end up with. So I do always try to look out for the ones that tend to have the most. Unfortunately, it's not in my budget to buy the really nice farmers market leeks that tend to have the really big long greens on. I just do get regular supermarket leeks, and sometimes they've barely got any greens on them at all. So that is something to look out for. So I do like trying to separate the layers. We can see some of that dirt in there now. We're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of the dirty areas. And generally you are supposed to wash before you chop when it comes to sorting through your fruits and vegetables, but for the leeks I just find that if you attempt to wash them like that before you've done any kind of chopping, prepping or separating, you really don't get into the really dirty parts towards the centre. So I always with my leeks do a little bit of separating and chopping before I get them washed, because you're really not going to get 3 layers deep into this just by washing it when it's whole as it comes off the top of the leek. To be perfectly honest, before I started the low FODMAP diet, I actually used to discard this part because it can be a little bit woody, can be a little bit sinewy. You can see there, it's almost like when celery goes a little bit woody. But to be perfectly honest, from doing the low FODMAP diet, I just really got used to the texture of it. I got used to its quirks and to the fact, that's a really gritty one in there, that it does need a little bit of a longer cooking time than the whiter bulb part. So I probably get it to roughly about that stage. We've trimmed off the really dry, scraggy ends. And then I get it to that stage, so when I am washing it, I can really get into all these layers, and then I'm going to chop it finely the way that I will use it in the recipe. So I think we've pretty much asked as much of that side of the board as we can. I'm now going to flip it over and tackle the last juiciest prep task of the day, and that is to top and tail and peel this pineapple, and I also like to core it down the middle as well. And for this, because it is going to be really wet, rather than put it directly onto the table, I am just going to use a little container to throw the peel and the ends into. And I will swap this back again actually for this knife that's got a little bit of flexibility in it. That's probably going to let me get closer to the skin without wasting as much of the pineapple flesh as a big inflexible knife like this one would. Of course, if it's in your budget, you could always buy the pre-prepped pineapple. That's going to save you a job, but kilo per kilo, you are going to pay for the privilege of having somebody else prep it for you. So sometimes it's a case of having to weigh up time versus budget. And switching back to the big knife, go straight down through the core. And Chef's Prerogative says that I get to snack on this bit. I like eating it like sweet corn.
And now we're on to the wet prep. And whilst I don't need to show you how to wash your veggies, I just wanted to give you an overview of everything I'm getting washed and prepped. And typically I'd wash everything over a clean washing up bowl and save the rinse water to use in my garden. But we've had non-stop rain here in the north of England for months now, so there's no point catching the water when the garden's already saturated. When washing your produce ahead like this, it's important to make sure it's drained, dried and stored properly to stop it going bad. It's pointless putting in all this effort if your produce isn't going to last. So I'm going to share how I keep everything fresh once we've got it all washed. When it comes to canned beans, rinsing and draining them really well helps to remove the excess FODMAPs that have leached from the bean into the canning liquid. I rinse until all the signs of gloop, foam and bubbles are gone.
And then what I like to do when I've washed my greens is use these cloths. I only use these for food purposes. I don't use these for washing up or anything. And I like to wrap all of my nicely washed greens. Just wrap them in one of these cloths. It does tend to soak up a lot of the excess water and they last quite nicely inside here for at least 3 days. Usually they'll last me up to a week in there like that. And then I pop that into one of these bags. And that is how I store it in the salad crisper in my fridge. And I found that works really, really well. And I do it with all types of greens, kale, rocket, lettuce. And I find that doing it like this in bulk as well before you're ready to use it also helps not only make sure that it's lovely and clean when you do come to use it, but I find that it actually helps then so that the lettuce isn't wet through because you haven't just washed it just before you're using it, and it doesn't then dilute any of your salad dressings with lots of liquid in the bottom of the bowl because the lettuce is pretty dry by the time you come to use it. And sometimes with kale, because there's usually more kale than anything else, I'll use 2 cloths. You could also use a clean tea towel for this. For a full bag of kale like this, that would probably be easier. And there we have it. So we've got our kale, our lettuce and our rocket. And the stuff like the tomatoes and the broccoli that it's fairly easy to drain, I'll just drain those in a colander and pop them in a tub.
So whilst we've been chopping, washing and prepping, our millet has absorbed all of that water and has cooked up nicely. I just need to fluff it up and put it aside to cool. Our diced sweet potatoes are fully cooked. The whole baked potatoes need a bit longer, so I'm going to remove the diced potatoes and leave the whole potatoes to continue cooking whilst I add our coated diced tofu. I like my tofu extra crispy, so I'll cook mine for about 15 to 18 minutes at 200 degrees Celsius. To keep the tofu crispy as it cools, I spread it out in a single layer on a wire mesh to allow the air to get all the way around it, and this stops it from sweating or softening as it would if you cooled it on a flat surface.
So how do you think we got on with the food prep? Well, I think we did a pretty good job. So grains wise, we've got some diced sweet potatoes and whole sweet potatoes, and we've also got our millet. For our beans, we've got our crispy baked tofu. We've got our lentils rinsed, drained and ready to go. And we've got our cannellini beans. For our fruits, we've prepped our pineapple. So I've left some in slices and we've got some diced. We've also got 2 different types of nuts there, chopped and ready to go. For our veggies, we've got our carrot grated for the next 3 days. We've got courgette as a poor man's attempt at noodles and grated. We've got some broccoli there ready to cook however we want it. We've got our cruciferous veggies with the radish here. We've also got our kale and our rocket washed and ready to go. We've got our lettuce ready. We've got our French green beans topped and tailed. We've got our tomatoes washed. We've got our peppers washed and ready to go. So I'm really quite pleased at how much prep we've actually got done. And this is going to be a huge time saver over the next few days. So let's see now how we can take all of these cooked and prepped elements, start putting them together and making some daily dozen meals.
So on day 1, I made a 5-minute millet porridge, which ticked off a daily dozen grain, nut, flax and berry portion. I threw together an 8-minute tofu stir fry using all my pre-prepared veggies and tofu. I whisked up a quick peanut sauce while the veggies cooked and added a cheeky portion of sauerkraut to boost my cruciferous veg for the day. It was quick, fresh and delicious. I chopped together some salad veggies with avocado, pineapple and fresh chilli to make a zingy salsa that incorporated 3 of my fruits for the day. To bulk it out, I sautéed a portion of lentils and sweet potato with spices. I whizzed the cannellini beans up with nutritional yeast, seasonings, yoghurt and lemon juice to make a cheesy sour cream, which is a sneaky way to add extra protein and tick off another bean portion. I spread the creamy cheese onto a wholemeal tortilla wrap and added the fruity salsa, spicy lentil mix and extra greens. I ate the rest of it as a salad on the side. Day 2 started with toasting pecans, oats and flax until fragrant. I then spent way too much time layering up the cooked sweet potatoes, nuts, sliced banana, toasted oats and flax, yoghurt and defrosted raspberries. I ended up with 2 or 3 layers of everything to create this beautiful dessert for breakfast. I doubt I'd take the time to make this look so pretty if it wasn't going to be on camera, but if you eat with your eyes or have folks over for breakfast, then this is definitely worth the effort. For lunch, I pretty much ticked off greens, veggies and remaining fruit for the day with a huge salad made up of the pre-washed veg that just needed chopping, tearing and tossing together. I topped it with millet, crispy tofu chunks and cheesy sauce that I added extra dried Italian herbs and lemon juice to make a salad dressing, and this ended up making 2 huge meals. For tea, I used the prepped veggies and lentils with a tin of cherry tomatoes and stock to make a speedy tortilla soup. The wholemeal tortilla made up my final grain portion of the day. I sprinkled it with garlic oil and spices before cutting it into quarters, stacking them together and slicing it into little tortilla croutons. These crisped up nicely in the air fryer in a few minutes and made a delicious topping to the soup. I honestly didn't expect to eat a whole tortilla in this way, but they are so Moorish and addictive. I finished the soup with a swirl of that homemade sour cream and ticked off the last of my fruit for the day in the form of some diced avocado. Then on to day 3, where I learned from my previous efforts that the ingredients from yesterday's breakfast tasted just as good thrown together in a jar as they did nicely layered. I added plant milk and extra yoghurt and left them in the fridge overnight to make rich and fruity overnight oats. Lunch was a speedy tortilla pizza and my Italian friends should look away now because a girl's got to get those fruit portions in where she can. I added crispy tofu, beanie cheese sauce and vegan cheddar. This was cooked in the air fryer in 7 minutes, and with the added rocket, it impressively ticked off a grain, bean, fruit, vegetable and a green. Then on to the final recipe of the challenge, a warming lentil and sweet potato 10-minute curry that fed me for 2 hearty meals. Adding peanut butter and yoghurt made the sauce so rich and creamy. I whipped up a quick grated cucumber yoghurt and herb chutney to go on the side. Instead of rice, I served the curry with the last of the millet that I'd heated up in the microwave, and this gave me my final grain for the day. I really hope this video has inspired you to give ingredient prepping a go, and that you'll use some of these time-saving tips and tricks to get you closer to your ultimate daily dozen day. This video is already way too long, so there will be separate videos for each of the 3 days that go into more detail on the recipes and include checking off the Daily Dozen categories to show you my tally for each day. Make sure you keep checking back on the channel to see when those go live. If you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I appreciate you so much, and any interaction that you can take on this video, such as a like, comment, share or subscribe, helps more people just like you to find it when they search. Thanks so much for watching, happy ingredient prepping, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!